In the previous session, one of the examples we showed when we were determining the local fund assignment, the local share, there was a district when you went through the process that actually had raised more locally than what the total was for Tier 1. And that's a budget balanced district, but it also leads you into the concept of recapture. And recapture is a process where you're recapturing the efficiency of the system that's lost due to our heavy dependence on property taxes and the fact that taxable wealth value in the state is not spread in the same proportion that students are. And so in order to get the resources of the state to the children, because it's a statewide obligation constitutionally, what we do is we have a choice. We either move children to other districts or we move the resources that come from taxation in the districts where we have value in abundance. And that process is called recapture, as we recapture the efficiency of the system. So before we start recapture, I want to show you something. Now, there's a small town out close to Lubbock named Sundown, and they are a property wealthy district. And so I went online, and you can do this too. Go to the summary finance and just pick a district and go to the recapture, cost of recapture reports under the summary finance, that section. And I want to show you just how much detail goes into the calculations. Other than that, we're not going to talk about Sundown just for this process. That's the first page of the calculations, and that's where they're drawing data in to do the calculations. And I want to call your attention to this area here. If you can see that we go back to 1991 certified prior year values. We go back to 1992-93 WADA. And that's because there was a hold harmless that was put in place. And so for every district, this calculation happens. And it goes into great detail, lots of math. It's very complex when it doesn't need to be. Recapture can be done a lot simpler than what it is. But there's the second page. And you see we're going through the hold harmless calculations right there. Here's the third page. Don't intend for you to pay any attention to the numbers. Just note how much that's going on. You've got all kinds of formulas built in. Here's the next page. All of that just to do the recapture calculation, so it's no wonder that people have a hard time understanding it. But as I said, it can be greatly simplified. I'm not going to simplify it here in this presentation, but what I am going to do is I'm going to cut out a lot of those other discounts, like in the law, whenever someone buys attendance credits from the state, it's a process of recapture, they get a certain percentage back. A discount. There's other things involving CADS funding and different things. All of that goes into it. I'm going to cut those things out and just get down to the essence of it so you can understand the concept. And if you're ever interested in what is a simpler way to do recapture, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Okay, first thing, the basic allotment is linked to the equalized wealth level. It's linked in statute, and the equalized wealth level is the point of recapture. That is the wealth level above which recapture takes place. And so the basic allotment and the equalized wealth level are linked. You equalize up using the basic allotment, and you recapture down, although not completely, using the equalized wealth level. In 2013-14, the basic allotment was $49.50. And if you look there at the equalized wealth level, you can see the similarities. It's in a wealth level. It's in a value per WADA level. But nevertheless, it's the same number. This year, the basic allotment for Tier 1 went up to $5,040. And you can see the equalized wealth level is $504,000. They're linked together. When the basic allotment goes up, then the wealth level you're allowed to keep goes up as well. So raising the basic allotment reduces recapture as well as providing more money to lower wealth districts. So let's do an example. We're going to use the 2014-15 equalized wealth level, and for our calculation, we're going to assume a WADA of 500. We want to keep these numbers small for simplicity's sake. And let's say a prior year value of 300 million. And let's say because values were going up, that's prior year value, that 300 million. Let's say current year values were higher. And so at your compressed tax rate, you collected $3.3 million. So that's going to be our assumptions for these calculations. Very simple process. You take the equalized wealth level, which is the wealth level that's the highest before recapture takes place. You multiply it by WADA to get an equalized tax base. That's the first step. That's the tax base that you could have without having recapture. And all of the taxes you collect on that value is retained by the district. So you calculate the excess. So you take your prior year taxable value, what your prior year values actually were. If your values have gone up, you don't use that higher number. If your values went down, you don't use that lower number. You just use your prior year values, your state funding values, and you subtract out that equalized tax base that we just arrived at a number. In that case, as you'll recall, the number on the previous slide was $252 million. So you subtract that from your prior year taxable value, and what you have left over is excess tax base. That's the tax base. The collections on that tax base, that excess tax base, are what is recaptured. So take that excess tax base and divide it by your prior year taxable value to get a percent. And the $48 million that was part of the excess tax base divided by the prior year taxable value, your state funding value, and you get 0.16 in this particular illustration. And that's the money, that's the percent that you're going to be recaptured. That's your percent of recapture is 16%. So you take all of your Tier 1 collections, because that's what this applies to, is just Tier 1, and you multiply that by the percent of your excess tax base, your percent that's going to be recaptured, and that gives you your recaptured amount. So in our case, we had $3.3 million, and 16% of that is that amount of money. So that would be the recapture amount, and you would use that money to buy attendance credits, for one thing, from the state. There are other things you can do instead of buying attendance credits, but that's the most common. And the other things that you do are generally more onerous than that. And you do get that kickback part of that, the discounts. So that's what's recaptured at the compressed tax rate. We haven't gotten into Tier 2 yet. That's in Tier 1. So let's go back and look at Tier 1 funding. Let's review a little bit. Let's say that your Tier 1 tax collections was $3.3 million. And your guaranteed state aid, because everybody gets at least that, remember, it was $135,000 from a prior slide. And here's the recapture we just calculated. This is your Tier 1 funding. Now, there is a shortcut to that I'm going to show you. I used to hate this whenever my teachers would do this in school, where they'd take me through a long, drawn-out process and then saying, here's a shortcut. But this does not take into consideration all of those things that TEA has to take into consideration. But it works just as well. When you get a run from the LBB, a computer run, generally one of the columns will be district wealth. And there'll just be a number there. And, of course, you know what the equalized wealth level is, because that's going to be $504,000 for this year. It's going to be your basic allotment with 2 more zeros. So you just take your equalized wealth level, the highest level you're allowed to retain all your money, and then you divide it by your district wealth, and that will give you the percent that you keep, the retained part. So obviously, if you're going to retain 84%, then you're going to be recaptured the 16%. That's just 1 minus the part that you're retained equals the part that you're recaptured. You still get that 0.16. And that's a much easier way to kind of do it down and dirty, remembering that does not include the discounts. It does not include the wealth hold harmless and other funding things. So it's not going to give you the totally accurate, but it gets you in the ballpark and it gives you an idea of what these districts are facing. Thank you.